Oh boy, I wanted to talk a little bit about my buddy John Albright, and so what I came up with was that he and Judy have been for the last 10 or 12 years like a big brother and a sister to me, and we would talk about the three of us would talk about how we were chosen family, and John was definitely somebody that I looked up to in so many ways. Every spring, usually in about April, he and I would he would see the first osprey on a nest on Prospect Avenue or by River Ponds, or I would, and we'd both get a little bit excited about that, about another spring coming around. But I'd kid him. I used to say that I'd give him or ask him a question about something in history, and not only would he know it, he would tell me a story. He would bring it to life. And all the years that I knew John, I thought, God, I wish I had had a history teacher like him back when I was a kid, because I used to hate history. It made no sense to me, and there was no relevance. But with John, he made it real, and he loved doing that. He also had a dry sense of humor, and he and I saw humor in a lot of similar things in that, and we would joke with each other about that. I think I mentioned already that he was somebody that I really looked up to, and I know he was very active in historic preservation here in Larimer County, and over the years that I knew him, I also knew that he had volunteered at the Humane Society. He would tell me stories about that. I know he worked with the National Park Service for years, and I would goof up and call it the Forest Service, and he would always correct me, always tell me it was the Park Service, not the Forest Service, and that I was going to get in trouble someday if I said that to the wrong person. His service in Vietnam, one of the last times that I spent with John before he died, was he showed another friend, Maury, and I, a slide carousel of pictures that he had taken in Vietnam, and he had them all put together on a carousel. And I think this was he gave us pretty much a lecture like he had when he was teaching Vietnam history at CSU. Another thing that really sticks in my mind too was what a good-hearted man he was. He was such a lover of animals and especially cats. And I remember when I moved, about 10 years ago, I needed to find a home for a cat, Blue Bear, and Judy and John took Blue Bear and had him for a couple of years, and they just loved him. And then Blue got sick, and John took him in to have him put to sleep. And I remember it just broke John's heart to have to put Blue to sleep. And then I found a stray cat for him that turned out to be ill also, and they had Callie for 3 or 4 years, and then she also had to be euthanized. And I remember John that evening when he came home, I went over to just see how he was doing, and he said, God, it just breaks his heart when he has to take the cats in and have them put to sleep like that. So my God, what a really good-hearted man and a brilliant man, and just a teacher and a friend and a companion on this, on the last 10 or 12 years of my walk through life. The last thing I was going to say is just that I was present when John took his own life. He used the Death with Dignity bill and was able to make a decision on a date. And John was surrounded by family and friends, all of us that loved him. And I sat there just thinking about how blessed I was to have had John Albright in my life for the time that I had. And I'll remember him as long as I live. And I could go on probably for another 45 minutes. I got all kinds of notes, but I put those down. I shared what I really wanted to say. And there's so many things about John that I'm going to miss, but more than anything else, I'm just feeling so blessed that I had this wonderful man and friend for all the years that I did. So that's it. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Maury Miller. I need to start off by saying I am an actual person. I'm not John's imaginary friend, which that's going to make sense here in a minute. I met John in 1992 as a freshman at CSU. He helped get my first load of classes in and locked down when my normal advisor was not available. I ended up taking several of his classes over the years. We ended up talking. We talk outside of class. I was working as a police officer at the time, and I would see John coming across the plaza with his cup of hot tea, wearing his hat with his Vietnam veteran pin on, and he was always insistent that I not leave CSU for another law enforcement job until I finished my degree. I did finish my degree. I ended up going to work for the Larimer County Coroner's Office. While there, as a thank you, I ended up making John a hunting knife and taking it up and giving it to him at his office. He wrote me a very nice letter afterwards thanking me for that. A short while later, I reconnected with John again after the death of one of his friends, and he made the comment that he had lost his antelope hunting partner and his fly fishing buddy. It wasn't too long ago, long after that I drew my first antelope tag, and John and I hunted ever since together. That was, I believe, 2003. For many years, John and I would hunt together, and he would tell his sons about this guy, Maury, that he was going hunting with, and Maury got this deer, and Maury took me, and I got this doe antelope. And for the longest time, Bruce and Martin just thought that their dad had an imaginary playmate. That continued until I finally got to meet both boys, got to hunt with John and Bruce at one point. Over the years, John became more than a friend to me. He was a mentor. He was a confidant. He was a swift kick in the backside when I needed it while going through my divorce. He told me I was going to be okay. He told me how bad it had to hurt and that he understood that, but that I was going to be okay. And I believed him, ironically. He always wanted to know how the kids were doing. If there was a hunt that I was on that he wasn't able to go to, he wanted to know all the details, how far the shot was, where we were, how it happened, how things came together. Last summer when John started to decline and we kind of realized what was going on and the diagnosis came down, I was fortunate that I typically had at least one day off in the middle of the week, and typically that was Friday. So given his diagnosis of ALS, instead of Tuesdays with Maury, we had Fridays with John. We would go get a bite to eat. We'd stop and get a cup of hot tea. We'd go run errands. We'd just spend time and talk. And I have thoroughly missed my Fridays with John over the last 3 months. I got to engage in the gaffers group and sit and listen to stories and laugh and joke with some extremely magnificent human beings because of John. John poured into me by pouring into my family. He absolutely adored my daughter Eva and would always sing her praises on what a great kid she was. I'm going to miss John this fall when I get up to the mountain or I get out on the prairie. I've been honored to have him in my life. It's going to be a big void this fall, and I hope to fill it with taking some folks who have never hunted before, hunting, because he would get a kick out of that. Through all of this, his big worry was leaving people. He was ready to go when he went, but he was worried about Judy. That has been his biggest stressor through all that, through our conversations. As things came to an end, we had frank conversations, and it brought peace just knowing where he was at with things. When I get up there this fall with John's rifle, it isn't going to be the same. but there are many times when we would be coming home from a successful, unsuccessful trip where the back of the truck was empty and no shot was fired and no shell was chambered, that John would say that at least it's better than working at the shoe department of the Logan Valley Mall in Altoona, Pennsylvania. And that's what it's going to be this fall. Thanks, folks.
John and Judy Albright were delightful close friends of my husband, Dave McComb, and me. We spent many happy hours at dinner with lots of laughter and talk. John loved songs and singing, and I used to find old paperback songbooks for him from the 50s and before, and he would flip through them happily, singing snatches of songs from every one. I think he knew practically every song ever written and its history. Once Dave heard of a song that Dave, thought was obscure. He heard it mentioned in a Tuna, Texas dramatic production. "John," Dave said, "do you know Bright in the Corner Where You Are?" John immediately burst into song and sang every verse with chorus. John was a wonderful storyteller. He was from the far, far, far south. He was born in the Panama Canal Zone, and he had a remarkable sense of humor and storytelling. One story that I loved involved an Episcopal church that he attended when he lived in Virginia many years ago. John was a historian and on the church vestry or church council and very influential. The church had also had a parishioner named G. Washington, and Mr. G. Washington, a man of faith, also a vestryman, but somewhat earlier than John, had left his personal Bible to the church. The George Washington Bible had safely been in a safety deposit box out of sight for many, many years. John, always lobbying in the interests of history and historical research, felt that the George Washington Bible should be displayed in the Smithsonian, but alas, other vestrymen were horrified and firmly decided that the George Washington Bible should continue to live in a respectable bank, in a respectable safety deposit box, safely away from prying historical eyes. John lost that battle, but he won another. This particular historic church also had a historic table and some sort of historic meeting room, and the table impeded common foot traffic and was a general awkward hazard and nuisance. John proposed several times and with great persuasion that the table be moved out of the traffic pattern. But again, and alas, each time John presented the move, the vestry decided that the sacred table was in a sacred spot and that it should not be moved. John cheerfully dropped his campaign, but every time he and a friend were alone in the vestry room, the table mysteriously moved slightly, ever so slightly, toward the proposed by John location, and after a long, long, long time, the table, mysteriously of course, had removed itself to a new location, and no one noticed at all. According to John, tables do that sometime. We miss you, John. You with your laughter and your songs and your stories and your charm and your humor.
I first met John Albright in August of 1999, having moved from Turkey to Fort Collins. John invited me over to his home to meet his wife, Judy. When I arrived at the house on Dogwood, above the doorbell was a sign that said, "On this site in 1870, nothing happened." This was a clear sign of John's sense of humor. We all became quick friends and spent many hours together, including making meals together on all of holidays. John was really proud of his hometown, the Panama Canal Zone, and was really quite angry with Jimmy Carter, which he often said, "Jimmy Carter gave away my hometown, that SOB," as you could imagine. one of the things about John was that he loved his family. He often talked about his kids, Martin, Bruce, Mary, and Don. And John would be what we would now know in literature as the trickster. And if you can imagine this, John at one point had a VW van. And John told me the time that he had the kids in the van and they were driving about town. And he said, "Do you see those radio towers up on the hill?" And he said, if you squint really hard, you could see the radio waves. Well, the kids were all excited about whether they could actually see these radio waves. And they squinted and said, "We can't see." And he said, "No, you're just not trying hard enough." And they squinted and squinted till finally Mary, catching on to the whole thing, said, "I can see it, I can see it," and which drove Bruce and Martin out of their minds, because the more they squinted, the less they could see anything. So John had many signature pieces. We all remember John for his aviator glasses, his bolo ties, his Vietnam service bars on his lapel, and his black boots. Now, one day he said, "Come on over, we'll go out and get something to eat." And it was a really hot July day. When we were about ready to go, John started to put on some black boots. And I said, "John, it's so hot out. Are you sure you don't want to put on some sandals in this heat?" And he looked at me in all seriousness and said, "Sandals are for hippies and Jesus," which meant there was not a chance he was ever going to take those boots off. Now, John also loved all types of music. Having grown up in Panama, he loved music in Spanish. One time I went to the house, I found John and Judy listening to some Mexican music. Having grown up in that community, I knew that when that music played, the beer bottles would start flying, as would the punches. I was absolutely horrified at this and said, "What are you doing playing this music?" And he looked at me and said, "Well, why not?" When I recounted this story to Martin, Martin gave me that panic and said, "Oh my God, is my dad playing that marimba music again?" John also served in the armed forces, serving in the U.S. Army, and spent time in Germany as a member of the cavalry. During his time in Vietnam, he would send home tapes, reel-to-reel tapes, for his family to hear. This in turn got Mary a trip to the principal's office for using salty language, which he had learned from John on the tapes. Later on, John reflected upon his life and his kids, and which he treasured greatly. He loved his time with Bruce and Martin, fishing and hunting, and said that, his guns, it meant a great deal to John to give the guns to Martin and to Bruce, as well as the fishing gear, as a remembrance of their time together. But John looked at me in all seriousness and said, "I just don't know what I'll give Mary. She means so much to me, and a lamp just isn't going to do it." Now, as many of you know, when calling John, he would answer the phone. You'd say, "John, how are you?" And he would answer, "Better than a kick in the head." So, as you can imagine, the day came that John, not knowing what to give Mary, one day said to me, "I found a box that belonged to my mother. I want to make sure that I give it to Mary." When they arrived at the house, John made sure to say to Mary, "Would you like this item from Grandma?" Mary lit up and was more than pleased, which made John happy, seeming to think that this was much better than giving her a lamp. And John was always very supportive of my choices and was always willing to lend a hand. The opportunity came for me to move back to Turkey. John was more than happy to take me to the airport. He helped me with my luggage. He walked me into the terminal, helped me deposit everything. And he said, "We've had a good time, all of us." He remembered all the meals we had made together, all the friends that had shared those meals with us at their house. And he started to tear up a bit. He turned on his heels and said, "I'm going to miss you, kid," and quickly walked away before I could see him cry. I came back to Fort Collins recently to see John before he left us. And all I can think of is, "Sir, I'm going to miss you too."
Hello, John. This is Mel Wright and Carol Wright. Like hundreds of others, we're lucky enough to call you a friend. Too often, when death of a wonderful person such as yours occurs, We find ourselves wishing that we had known and interacted more with this person. That is where we find ourselves. You and Judy were our first friends in Clydesdale Park even before we officially moved here. We attended a Clydesdale community dinner after signing to have our house built. In one night of a Clydesdale Park community dinner, we fell in love with this community and made new friends that night. John and Judy invited us to see your home, which is the same model as ours. You pointed out a number of interior things we should change and made a huge difference in the feel of our home. You hooked us up with Ted, who turned out to be a master builder and a landscape genius. You have no idea how many times we look back at that dinner and are so thankful for your friendship and your advice. John, I was amazed at how many ways our experiences and lives connected, such as service in Vietnam, Guam's infamous brown snakes, and the Indian Wars in Kansas and Colorado. What are the odds of making friends with a person who knew more details about my family's histories and my great-great-aunt Susanna Alder's capture in Kansas by the Cheyenne dog soldiers and her subsequent death by Chief Blackkettle's wife during the 7th Cavalry rescue attempt here in Silver Springs, Colorado? I'd love to have taken your history courses at CSU, which I hear you delivered with that infamous wry sense of humor of yours. I'm very sure many of those students have heard of your passing and smile at the memories while a few tears well up in their eyes. John, your sense of humor, no matter the subject, somewhere, somehow you slipped in a sleeper joke or ended with a funny exclamation. In every conversation I found with you, I would be chuckling at your phraseology. You were truly one of those people that was a joy to be around, to chat with, or just listen to. While nothing of a historical note happened at your home's location in 1867, per your bronze plaque by the door, I think everyone in Clydesdale Park who had the pleasure of knowing and talking to you would agree that a new sign needs to be placed at your entrance. I'm not a wordsmith, so I have no idea how to state it, but I'm sure something of the order of, if you were to write it, it might say, "Hey, COVID-19 in the year 2020, I skipped your craziness. Signed, John." But more fitting might be something like, "A man and a husband of honor and bravery and dignity lived and died here. He shall be remembered as such by all who knew him. Mel and Carol. Hope you're doing well up there. Take care."